Today's daf is daf Mem Tes. And we'll begin here where we left off yesterday, Mem Ches Amud Beis. And that's 3 lines up before the end of the Amud. Ma'arvo Shomayim, Ton Rabbanon. Mase B'tztuki Echad, Shenisach al Gabi Raglov. The Tztukim, as we said yesterday, they fought against this institution called Nisach Hamayim. And the reason for that is because they didn't accept Torah Shebal Peh. So he poured the water, instead of on the Mizbeach, he poured it on his feet. Urgamu kol ha'am b'esrogeim, and they pelted him with their esrogim. Rashi says that there were some who were hidden in the crowd that threw stones. The Osa Yom Nifgama Keren HaMizbeach, as a result of the stones, the Keren, there were 4 kronos on top of the Mizbeach. One of them was hit by a stone. And here's a machlokas mefarshim exactly why the Mizbeach was puzzled. It could be that it damaged in a very severe way one of the kronos, or it could be that the Keren was hit on one of its corners, and there's a precondition that the Keren has to be ribua, it has to be perfectly square. In any event, the Mizbeach became puzzled. They view bull shel melach, and bull is what you could fit into a hand of salt, ustamuhu. So this was just what you call a cosmetic covering. Lo mipnei shehuk shel avoda. At that point, the Mizbeach was puzzled, and you cannot fill in the part that's missing in the Mizbeach with salt, but they did it. Rashi adds the words mipnei hakavod. So we have a certain amount of respect that we are obligated to the Beis Hamikdash in general, and certainly to the Mizbeach in particular, so that it wouldn't look like the Mizbeach was damaged. They sort of camouflaged it with this salt. And now we start the daf for today, which is daf Mem Tes. The kol Mizbeach she'ein lo. Now the Gemara establishes that there are 4 critical elements in the Mizbeach, without which the Mizbeach is possible. What are these 4? Number 1, we need a kevesh. So Mizbeach she'ein lo kevesh, if it doesn't have a lead, a ramp, as we call it, to climb up and reach, that's how the Kohanim would climb up and reach the Mizbeach. Or velo keren, if it's missing one of the 4 kronos, velo yisod, or perhaps it's missing the yisod, the base of the Mizbeach, or velo ribua, if it's not perfectly square, pasul avoda. Then we cannot do any of the avoda on the Mizbeach if it's missing any of the 4. Rabbi Yossi adds a 5th. Rabbi Yossi bar Yudomer af hasovev. So let's go through these parts of the Mizbeach, and Rashi tells us that in each of these cases, the Torah uses the word ha-Mizbeach. So, for example, it says kronos ha-Mizbeach. It says yisod ha-Mizbeach, or ravua yeh ha-Mizbeach. And in the case of the kevesh, it says el pnei ha-Mizbeach. And all these psukim are in Vayikra, and one of these psukim is also in Bamidbar. But what's common to all these psukim referring to these 4 parts of the Mizbeach is the word ha, the letter ha, which means hey hayediyah. This is a profound and critical requirement in the Mizbeach. So we begin by constructing the Mizbeach from the bottom up, and we start with the yisod. The yisod was a perfectly square base, and the Mizbeach is made up of 3 parts, starting with the larger part, which is the base, and that's going to be 32 amos square. And then we build another square on top of that, on top of the base, and that is going to be 28 amos squared. So we're going like a pyramid. It's going from broad to narrow, Then in the middle of the Mizbeach, we have what's called the Sovev, and the Sovev is very similar to the Yesod. The Yesod is bolet 1 amma by 1 amma, and the Sovev likewise is going to be 1 amma by 1 amma. And the Sovev is used for the purpose of the Kohanim who have to do the avodah on the Mizbeach, that they can circle around the Mizbeach. And as a general rule, they face the Mizbeach and they circle to the right. This means that they go counterclockwise. There are 3 exceptions that we discussed yesterday. But in any event, that's called the Sovev. And then you have the Gag HaMizbeach on the top where the Maracha is for the burning of the Haktaras HaMurim, and the 4 corners of the Gag HaMizbeach are called the 4 Kronos HaMizbeach. And once again, as we said before, the Torah says Karnos HaMizbeach with the Hey. And this is more or less the structure of the Mizbeach. You may have a diagram. In my Gemara, I have a diagram. You'll see that the Kevesh, which is the ram, which we derived from the pasuk El Pnei HaMizbeach, again the Hey, is 32 amos long, and it is Tes Zayin Amma, that's 16 amma wide. So you have Lamed Beis and Tes Zayin, those are the dimensions of the Kevesh. And the Kevesh, by the way, had a very special status. It is Mizbeach. For example, normally we have a psul of lina if you leave kachim overnight beyond their allotted time. But that doesn't apply if the kachim were on the kevesh. The kevesh is considered an integral part of the Mizbeach. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda make sure that we add the Sovev to the list. And as we said before, the Sovev is that ledge in the middle of the Mizbeach where the Kohanim could go around to go from one side to the Mizbeach to the other, because certain avodas had to be done on one side and others on the other side. Now let's just add another few comments just for the sake of broadening our knowledge. The Yesod HaMizbeach was not absolutely square in the sense that it was closed on all sides. It was certainly closed on the northern side and the western side, but on the southern side and the eastern side, it was only 1 amma. And that has to do with the way the Migdash was divided up between Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Binyamin. And that's a sugya in Masechet Zvach. And therefore, certain korbanos, you have to do the zrika keneged hayesod. And if that be the case, then let's say the eastern flank of the yesod would be completely disqualified in that case for zrika because it's not keneged hayesod. Now, another point here is that there is a difference between the Mishkan of Moshe Rabbeinu in the Midbar and the Mizbeach. And the Torah in Shmos, towards the end of Sefer Shmos, in Perek Chaf Zayin, speaks about something called a karkov. And the karkov, which loosely we would translate it as a sovev, meaning it was also in the middle of the Mishkan around, but it was not a ledge. According to one opinion, in the Gemara in Zvachim, it was actually a ledge, but the other opinion, that of the Chachamim, is that it was something called a kiyar. Kiyar not in the sense of a water container, but kiyar milashon, beautifying. And there were works of art that were actually carved in to the middle of the Mishkan. And that's called a karko. So that according to Rabbi Yossi, who adds the sovev, that's only with regard to the Beis HaMikdash, what we call a Beis Olamim that was built by Shlomo HaMelech. With regard to Moshe Rabbeinu's Mishkan, the parallel to the Sovev is the Karkov. And now we finished up with our discussion about the Stoki and how they pelted the Mizbeach and those who were carrying stones, and threw stones. Apparently one or maybe more than one person hit bullseye on the Kronos of the Mizbeach, one of the Kronos, and as a result, the Mizbeach became possible. Obviously, the Chacham were not happy about that situation, but they rectified it, and they were machshir the Mizbeach. Now we go back to Nisuch Hayayin. And if you recall, the Nisuch Hayayin was done in certain bowls. Again, Machlokas Tanoim, exactly what those bowls were made of, gold or perhaps plaster. And there were holes like nostrils in the bottom of these bowls. And the yayin went through these nostrils down to what's called the shitim or shisim. It's a little bit difficult to translate the word shisim into English, but what it basically means is certain open space, a halal, and the Gemara is going to assume that the shitim went all the way down to the tahom, to the center of the earth, subterranean. Amar Rabba bar Machana Rab Yochanan, shitim misheshes yimei habrachis nivra'u. The shitim were created by Almighty God during the 6 days of creation. And normally, we speak about the Beis Hamikdash in terms of man-made. And it takes the human effort to create the Beis Hamikdash. The exception to the rule is that which is below the Mizbeach, and that's called the Shitim. And Rabbah continues by quoting a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, and the way he darshans this pasuk, he derives the conclusion that the Shitim were created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself during the Sheshis Mea Brachos. The pasuk says, Shenemar, Chamuke Yerechayech, Kimo Chaloim Maisi Yedei Umon. This pasuk can be divided up into 3 parts. The first part is, if we could underline the word Yerechayech, and the Yerech is a reference to a part of the body which is concealed. And the Torah, when it describes the Mizbeach, it speaks about Yerech HaMizbeach. What is the concealed part of the Mizbeach? After all, I can see the Mizbeach with my eyes, but there's something below the Mizbeach which are called Shitim, and those are concealed. And Shlomo HaMelech, when he authored Shir Hashirim, and large chunks of Shir Hashirim are about the Beis Hamikdash with metaphors, he spoke about that part of the Mizbeach which is compared to a Yerech. And that's going to be a reference to the Shisim. Number 2, Chaloim. The word Chaloim is going to be interpreted as Chalal, in plural Chalalim, meaning an open area below the Mizbeach, hidden below the Mizbeach. And the Uman here, the professional artisan here, is an allusion to none other than the Creator himself. And here's how he darshans it. He says, Chamuke Yerechayech means those flanks that are concealed. Chamuke means concealed. Elu Ashisim, that is an allusion to the Shisim. And as we said before, they are considered Nerech HaMizbeach because they're concealed below the Mizbeach. And then, Kimo Chaloim, the next part of the pasuk, Chalolim v'yardim ad hatom. That these are chalolim. A chalal is an open space, airspace, and they go down all the way to the middle of the earth. Ma'aseh yedei uman zu ma'aseh yedei umnaso shel HaKadosh Baruch. And this is all the handiwork of God, the Creator, rather than the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, which is man-made. With regard to the Bayis HaShlishi, there's a tremendous debate about whether it's man-made or it would be created by the Almighty, and it come down from Him. Okay. Okay. Now the Gemara brings another support to this opinion that was expressed by Rabbah, that the Shisim were created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Tana debate Rabbi Yishmael, Bereshis. Let's take the word Bereshis, which refers to creation, and split the word into two parts. Al Tikri Bereshis, Ella Bara Shis. God created the Shis. He created the Shisim. Tanya. Now we go into a little more detail about the Shisim. Now we're going to see a fundamental machlokus about the Shisim. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shisim mechololim v'yardim ad hatahom. I'm going to bring a support text, says Rabbi Yossi, to this opinion that the Shisim went all the way down to the center of the universe, center of the globe. Shenemar, and here he quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu Novi, Ashira no liyedidi, shiras dodi lekarmo. And then the pasuk reads, Kerem hayoli didi, bekeren ben shemen, vayazkeu, vayasalkeu, vayitaeu, sorek, vayiven migdal besocho v'gam yekev chotzav bo. So this is a complicated pasuk, which the Gemara is going to take apart piece by piece. But I think if we have to identify the most critical parts of this pasuk for our purposes today, we would speak about the kerem. We're going to emphasize the word kerem here, which is, of course, a vineyard. We're going to talk about ben shemen, which means shamen. Shamen means fat, which means it's very healthy. It produces a lot, and it's very fertile. And we're going to speak about what's called the sorek, and what is the sorek. So the pasuk says, "Vayita'eu sorek," and this pasuk of Yeshayahu has two sides to it, so to speak. On the one hand, Yeshayahu is complaining, what we would call kvetching, about the fact that Klal Yisrael have disappointed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're not living up to their challenge. On the other hand, the pasuk itself is a song of praise, and it's sort of zela umaseh. Now, the pasuk that we emphasize, Ben Shemen, is an allusion homiletically to Eretz Yisrael. And Ben Shemen means the fattest of all lands. That's called Eretz Yisrael. The word Vayazeku means he circled around it with a fence. And what that means is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to be Manchil Eretz Yisrael, to give the land of Israel to the Jewish people to settle, but the idol worshippers were preventing this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu now is going to create a circle, a fence, to keep out the Canaanim and protect the Jewish people. And Rashi seems to indicate here that it's not the physical danger of the Canaanim that Yeshayahu is symbolically referring to, but rather the spiritual challenges and the influence of Canaanite immorality, and so forth and so on. Now the pasuk describes the Kerem and the owner of the Kerem. What kind of grapes is he producing? You can guess it, superior grapes. The quality is excellent. And here we have an allusion to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash is now being described by Yeshayahu HaNavi as the grapes that grow in a beautiful kerem, in a fertile land, and they have the highest quality. Now, whenever the pasuk describes the quality and the essence of the Mikdash, then because of the special relationship between Knesset Yisrael and the Mikdash, by implication, Yeshayahu is talking about the great love relationship between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Mikdash, after all, is his bias. And in that sense, this part of the pasuk is really similar to Shlomo HaMelech, in the sense that there's an allusion here to God's love. So even though the Jewish people have disappointed you, God, please continue your love for him. And that's the Vaya Azkehu, to encircle them and give them that siyata d'shmaya that would protect them from the negative influences of the nations around them. Now, we get to the word Yekev. Yekev, we should understand from a pasuk elsewhere in Tanakh, Yikvei HaMelech, these are underground pits. And that's where the wine is going to be stored, inside the Yekev. And the pasuk says, V'gam Yekev Chatzev Bo, which literally translates as these hewed out gigantic vats, which are underneath the structure of the Yekev. And that, according to this interpretation, is an allusion to the Shisim. And these are the Shisim. Now, to really appreciate this Gemara and the drasha, we would have to look into Yeshayahu HaNavi more carefully, because the Gemara only quotes the first two psukim of Perek Hey of Sefer Yeshayahu. But if you read the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh psukim, then I'll just give you a summary of what Yeshayahu says in those psukim. God hoped to produce fine grapes, but unfortunately, and he means too often, there was a disappointment and the grapes were not superior, but rather inferior. Now, the inhabitants of Yerushalayim and the people of Yehuda, what more could we have done? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds, my vineyard, didn't I do it for you? I created it for you. And in a sense, this is an allusion to the fact that God created the entire universe, and certainly the Mikdash, for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? I had hoped that you would produce fine grapes, and you only produced inferior grapes. The vineyard of Hashem and the people of Yehuda are considered like shoots that come out of the vines, and God had hoped for justice, but instead affliction, for righteousness, but an outcry. In other words, instead of producing justice and righteousness, God was disappointed with the vineyard, and so forth and so on. So this series of psukim of Yeshayahu is a nevuah which is very highly critical of the Jewish people. It's castigation. But in the context of this description of the vineyard, we learn about the Yekev and these openings, which are the Shisen. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Amar Abelazar Reb Tzaddik, and now we're going to see another opinion about whether the Shisim actually went down all the way to the Tahom, and whether or not they were created by God, the Creator, or by man. Amar Abelazar Reb Tzaddik, Mul Katan Hayaben Kevesh Lemizbeach. The Kevesh would, as we said before, be the ramp that leads you up to the Mizbeach, but it had to be a little bit of a distance from the Mizbeach. And that's based on a Gemara in Zvachim, that just like the dam requires zrika, we have a hekesh between dam and basar. The basar also requires a zrika. So the Kohanim are climbing the ramp to reach the maracha for the purpose of Torah, and they're going to throw the basar from a distance onto the Gag HaMizbech, onto the maracha. So there must be a distance, an opening between the Kevesh and the Mizbeach. B'maravo shel Kevesh, and it was on the western side of the Kevesh. So we discussed the fact that the Mizbeach is perpendicular to the Beis HaMikdash, and now when we talk about the Kevesh, and I think we have it here in a picture. Yeah, he doesn't really give you all the directions, the dimensions, but in any event, if anybody is now in the room over there, then you'll see my briefcase. You can see the diagrams in my briefcase. I don't have it with me here. In any event, it says that there was a lul katan, according to Rabbi Elazar. In that space, that open air between the Kevesh and the Mizbeach, there was a lul katan, and a lul is a kind of a box, man-made box, and the yayin from the nisach al gabi mizbeach would flow into this lul. The lul did not reach the tahom, and it was man-made. The achas l'shivim shana pirchei kahuna yordim l'sham. Once in 70 years, the young Kohen would go down there because the yayin has a status of kedushas haguf. It's sanctified, and although it's possible in Mizbeach because it's what's called karush, kuf, reish, vav, vet, karush, which means coagulated. So the wine is coagulated. It's no longer royal zrika. You can't use it on the Mizbeach and the avoda, but it still has kedusha to it. And every once in a while, once in 70 years, in fact, they would have to go down and clean out the yain. Yain karush. During the course of 7 centuries, it became so hard that you can compare it to pounded figs. You know, they used to take figs and pound them. I mean, if you remember from your youth, Elu Mitzias, you know, there's a whole question about finding igule tvela and whether you have to return it or not. Ubayin v'sofrin also b'kedusha. Since the yayin was endowed with kedushas haguf, therefore it had to be burnt, and the sreifa took place in the Azor. Shenemar, and here we quote a pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar Kodesh Aseich Nesech Sheikhar Lashem. Well, what does this pasuk teach me? And how do we derive from this pasuk conclusions about the Yayin Koresh? So for that, we have to turn to Daf Memtes Amid Beis.